Hello everyone, welcome to Insights Alley. In this series about startup basics, we will try to understand and learn from insights shared by various phenomenal people around startups, product, growth, sales, strategy, and everything in between. My name is Arun Verma, and let's get started. In today's episode, we will talk about the philosophy of jobs to be done framework with Alan Klement, who is the author of the book When Coffee and Kale Competes and the go-to expert around jobs to be done framework. Alan helps teams and individuals become great at making and selling products that people will actually buy. He has applied successfully jobs to be done theory to his own businesses and those he invests in. So here is the episode. Hey Alan, welcome to Insights Alley, and thanks a lot for taking out some time. Really appreciate it.
Hello. No problem. I'm excited to be here.
So Alan, would you like to start with telling us your career story in brief?
The very brief version is I started my first business about 15 years ago, actually like 18 years ago, and it was successful. You know, I grew up pretty well. I had employees working for me. I was making good business. But then I started shifting from someone who was making stuff and be involved with customers. I shifted from that to being more of a manager. So now I'm like dealing with hiring and finding employees and all that kind of managerial stuff. And I didn't like it.
Okay.
So I thought, hey, I'm just gonna give the business to someone else and I'll go back to making stuff, which I really enjoy the most. So then I started some other ventures and they all failed. I didn't get anywhere. And that's when I realized that I was really just lucky the first time, right? And I didn't really have any method on that, on how to actually build a successful business. So I started working for other people in the various capacities, engineer, product manager, owner, so on and so forth.
Right.
And so lately I've been doing consulting work as I figure out my next opportunity, which I've found right now. I'm actually building a new product right now.
Oh, nice.
So I'm excited to get back into making things again, starting another business. So that's where I am right now.
Oh, awesome. So let's dive into the main topic of today, jobs to be done framework. So Alan, what's a good definition and explanation of jobs to be done framework according to you?
Yeah, so for me, I define a job to be done as someone's desire to change an existing life situation into a preferred one, but they can't because some constraints are blocking them. So that's like the kind of short definition of it. Another way of thinking about it is we use the word progress a lot. So we use this description of people are seeking progress in their lives, meaning that they want to make some change in a particular direction. And, they can't make that change on their own. So therefore they look to some product or service or some combination of product and services for which they can hire to help them conclude or execute this job of changing myself from how things are today to how I would like things to be in the future. So we call that jobs, and we call it jobs theory.
Okay. So also there is this popular line of thought that jobs remain same, just the products that people hire change and better one comes, right? So could you give some example? There are many famous ones like McDonald's milkshake example, or even when coffee competes with Kale, right?
Yeah.
So could you explain on those a little?
Yeah, so I'll explain the idea first, and then I'll kind of give some comments about my thinking around that idea right now.
Sure.
So the basic idea was that, again, getting people away from focusing on the product or focusing on a particular activity, but rather, again, thinking about the job as a much more stable thing. And I'll kind of give an example. So if, for example, I am a salesperson and I'm trying to, and I own a business, and I'm trying to improve the sales process of my business, that change I'm seeking I'm desiring may exist maybe for as long as I have the business, wanting to improve the sales. It's that job of help me improve my sales pipeline will be pretty static. But however, I might hire and fire different products as technology changes, as I hire and fire salespeople, as other things change. That more higher level progress that I'm seeking will be the same. Mm-hmm. So that's a general idea of how jobs remain the same while solutions come and go. However, I have been not wanting to suggest that point of view because it's actually more complicated than that. It's very interesting, but it gets complicated pretty quickly.
Okay.
So I just for example, and I'll use a real example of a project we did about a year ago, and again, it goes back to the sales. Help me improve my sales process. So as an organization is trying to improve their sales process, their constraints and the desires are actually going to change as they make progress. So in the beginning, they kind of have this job around, help me get control of my sales process. And, there's certain constraints that they have there and a certain idea in their mind of what it's like to be in control. But then once they make progress on that, then like, okay, I've kind of checked that job off, right? There's a check mark on that. That's being full. The job is getting done, right? We moved from jobs to be done to I've hired a product and now the job is getting done.
Right.
Well, now this other job came up where now that I've controlled my sales pipeline, now I want to improve it, or maybe now I want to scale it. Okay. So now you have this, this new job kind of came up, and so I'm kind of looking to improve that. So it's like consumers will kind of have these jobs, but then they do kind of change and modify as they do make progress. So there's that. But then also from a market perspective, if you think about jobs as not changing, it's like, well, like yes and no. Like, for example, if we have a job around help me become a better parent, for example, that job, like as a high level idea, has existed for thousands of years, right?
Exactly.
But what it means to be a better parent in 1950 is different than what it means to be a good parent in the year 2000. Yeah. So it's like, is the job really the same? I mean, it's the same in name, but the constraints have changed, or what it means, to be a good parent has changed. Some things have not changed, some things have. So, it's at the high level. Yeah, you can say, jobs are kind of remain the same while solutions come and go, but then, maybe not. So it's an interesting thing to get into. I wish there's a short answer. We all like short answers to things, but I prefer to take more of a subtle point of view on that idea.
Interesting. So let's take an angle of jobs to be done in software product development, right?
Okay.
So first of all, why is it useful in software product development philosophy, and why should product and design teams adopt this mental model according to your experience?
Yeah. So for me, I will actually talk from personal experience.
Sure.
And this is, talking academically or hypothetically, I'll actually talk how it's helped me.
Right.
Both as a product manager, but also in what I'm doing right now when I'm starting a new business.
Sure.
So I have to say that I think that, and actually I was tweeting about this today.
Okay.
I would encourage people to distinguish between like jobs data versus like usability or user experience data.
Okay.
To me, jobs data, a job to be done should describe what the person is like before they use some product and then after they use some product.
Okay.
So that's the kind of data that you're capturing. So it helps you put up a good frame for what like the input and the output of your product, right? Okay, the input is the customer before your product, and then something happens, right? And then the output is, okay, they've changed, or things have changed for them for the better, and here's what that looks like.
Right.
And it's up to you as a product owner, manager, innovator, designer, whatever, to figure out, what's that middle part look like? So I think that's like, I think jobs gives you a good frame upon that and gives you the flexibility to be creative in the middle, right? So that's what I like. So right now I'm working on a tool to help organizations become better at gathering and organizing and consuming market insights.
Oh, okay.
And right, so that's what I'm doing. I'm building a product on that right now, and I'm doing the interviews for that. I'm doing the research for that and all that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of designing the jobs to be done right now. But I haven't really thought much about what the product will do or what it's going to look like. I mean, I have ideas, but I'm not really focused on that right now. I'm focused on, okay, how are things today? And then like, what's the like ideal future that these companies would love to be in the future? So I kind of want to like draw that frame up.
Okay.
And then use that. So when I work with the other engineers and their designers who say, hey, here's how customers are. Here's this ideal future for themselves. How can we connect the dots?
Okay. So as you mentioned, you are in that earlier product development stage. As a person who's, let's say, making a product, it's in very early stage and trying to make product either initially or just trying to make the product better incrementally. How should one think about finding these jobs? So let's say I'm making a meditation app or a productivity app. Consumer or B2B SaaS doesn't matter, but how should one think about finding these jobs? By talking to users, or what exactly?
Right. So I would say that we want to identify, again, as I mentioned before, there's particular data that we're looking for that helps us model and understand a job to be done. And then once you know what you're looking for, then you can really choose whatever methods you feel are best. And I actually suggest using a mixed method approach.
Mixed of what?
Mixed methods approach.
Okay.
Using different methods, mixing interviews with, one-on-one interviews, if you like, or with surveys or even focus groups or ethnographic research, kind of a real mixing things together, but recognize that you're looking for a particular jobs data. Right. So jobs data would be things like, what are the feedback loops that people are attuned to or looking for that tell them that either that they are where they want to be, right? So for example, what are the feedback loops that tell an organization or person that, yes, I have control of my sales pipeline and I'm happy with it, right? Or what are the feedback loops that tell me I may not have total control of my sales pipeline, but you know what? It's better today than it was last month. So I'm making progress.
Right.
So, we're looking for those. We want to identify those feedback loops.
Right.
That's one type of data we're looking for. Another type of data we're looking for are constraints. So like those are things that are blocking me from achieving that job, blocking me from improving my sales pipeline. It could be anything from maybe some functional constraint, like, you know what, I have to plug into Salesforce. Like no matter what, I have to plug into Salesforce,
Right.
Or something like, you know what, I'm really terrible at talking on the phone. Or, whatever it is, just like whatever constraints that exist that prevent someone from improving.
Okay.
And then other things like catalysts. So like those are things that happen in someone's journey or someone's in their life to kind of accelerate demand, like 3 months ago, you were fine with your sales process. You had control of your sales process, but now you don't.
Okay.
What happened? Like, how did that demand get created? How did that job to be done get created for you? Because again, 3 months ago, you weren't shopping for a product. You were fine. Right, but now you're frantically trying to find something. What series of events happened? So, and there's a few more things that we look for, but that's kind of the gist, feedback loops, catalysts, and constraints. And so then it's up to you to figure out what methods best help you understand those data and understand them and model them and gather them and organize them. So, I enjoy doing things like switch interviews, or sometimes people call them JDB or jobs to be done interviews. I prefer calling them switch interviews because they're not really, only regulated to jobs to be done. You can use a switch interview for anything.
Okay.
But those kind of interviews where you say, hey, tell me you just bought this iPhone today. You never had a cell phone before. A month ago, you never even owned a mobile phone. Tell me that story about how you went from owning no mobile phone to owning an iPhone.
Right.
Those are helpful. Again, that's kind of help you identify the types of data you're looking for, and then things like surveys are really good for quantifying it. So if someone say, yeah, I bought an iPhone because all my friends are doing it. Like, for example, like, okay, you've gathered that data through talking with someone. Now we can start counting, for example, how many of our customers bought an iPhone because they wanted to fit in.
Right.
So that's a good way of quantifying it. So again, it's about thinking about the particular data you're looking for and then choosing whichever methods you feel like will best help you, gather and validate those data.
Awesome. Alan, there is a concept of user persona. What are your views on that? And when is it helpful in a sense and when is it not? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the whole thing about personas is actually I wrote an article about it maybe 2 months ago.
Okay.
And I just think that personas are fundamentally flawed because and that's not their intent. Alan Cooper and I think Kim Goodwin is the other big persona person.
Mm-hmm.
I think their intent is good, but the persona model is flawed. And I can and probably my biggest evidence that it's a flawed model is the fact that even though Alan Cooper introduced personas, 30 years ago, 35, a long time ago, he's still like screaming at the top of his lungs, like, you're using personas wrong. You're using personas wrong. And I feel like that if a tool is designed properly, its misuse will be little or none. And so I think it's more a reflection of, well, actually, maybe you should start thinking that the tool was not well designed instead of blaming people for using it wrong. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like, it's really funny. It's interesting how Alan Cooper gets on software makers' cases about making a product that, isn't intuitive to the user. It's like, oh, I'm using this AutoCAD program. Your mental model's nothing how mine is. You're so lazy. But he's kind of doing the same thing with personas. He's blaming the users and not blaming the tool. Sorry. Okay. Slight tangent. But my biggest issue with personas is that it causes people to focus on the actual individual and not on their behaviors. I don't think focusing on the person is the right way to do it because that it's all about the behaviors that they're executing or trying to
execute. And their motivations also.
Yeah, and their motivations. And you know what? Behaviors and motivations are really, are demographic agnostic.
Right.
It's like it doesn't really, it's like someone trying to become a better parent.
That
maybe it's different culturally, right? But it doesn't really matter if you're black, white, tall, short, man, woman.
Makes sense.
There might be different contexts around it depending on culturally what that means. It's probably more dependent on culture than it is upon you as an individual, your name, your religion. Well, I guess that's kind of cultural, but those physical characteristics, which are part of a persona, and you can tell because just go to Cooper's website where they talk about perfecting your personas and they have a picture of someone using a persona and half the page is someone's face. It's like half is like someone's face. I'm like, well, you're trying to get the person to focus on, okay, it's a white woman in her 30s. Like that's what your brain's going to focus on. So I think it's much more productive to just think about, okay, well, what's the goals that are trying to be sought and what are the behaviors around those goals? And all the other stuff is just not that important.
Right. I remember reading one of your articles where you mentioned that persona kind of made sense when there was a wide gap between the product and design teams and the end user, right? But because that creates empathy in the team's mind for the user. But in today's day and age these teams should be constantly talking to these users. So the empathy part is already covered. User persona doesn't make use of any other thing. So yeah, makes sense. How do we replace this thing with job story you mentioned in brief earlier?
Yeah, so job stories. So for me, that was, again, that grew out of my own personal experience as a product manager.
Okay.
And it came from, I was writing user stories, in the traditional good old, agile way of doing things,
right.
And that's capital A agile, the branded agile process.
Right.
And I just found that it was like I wrote these user stories and then it was almost always developers or the engineers coming back to me and say, oh, actually, you know what? We could do this totally differently and better this other way, which is completely different. Or they would say, hey, you wrote this user story, but, did you know about this? And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so, I just felt like it was very much of a push model, pushing requirements to engineers and kind of treating them as machines, like dumb labor, like just do this, build this, and don't think.
Right.
And I found, and of course, a good engineer will always kind of push back on it, I believe. because they're invested in building a better product too. And so I found that, this user story model is too focused on building features or speccing a feature, whereas I think it'd be much better if I had a way of describing kind of the change that I'm hoping to make with this product or this feature. And so that's kind of where this idea of a job story of when I'm in this particular situation, I want, some kind of functionality so that my situation has changed or things have changed for the better. And so I say, okay, guys, so actually going back to job to be done. So, okay, guys, how can we, but it's more focused to a usage of a product though. So it's less general, whereas a job to be done probably is best at the marketing level, describing market level. Whereas I think job stories help you more granular, getting closer to the product because it's much more tied to a specific situation rather than more of a general feeling of progress. Right. So that's kind of how I like to use job stories one way, and that's the descriptive way. The other way that I use job stories, which I'll share it again on Twitter. Okay. I shared a video. I gave a presentation about a month ago about another way I'm using job stories now, and it's probably applicable to I'm building a new product right now, which is I'm actually writing job stories for a product that does not yet exist or for situations that maybe don't yet entirely exist yet. Okay. So I'm actually like creating hypothetical job stories and and then running that by potential users and saying, hey, is this, when these things happen to you, is this outcome attractive to you or not? Right. And so it's kind of like I'm doing this like user testing or this code designing with this framework. Co-designing, right? Yeah, co-designing a potential solution with a customer by using job stories and actually having them like working together, writing a job story for a product that does not yet exist.
Interesting. You mentioned jobs to be done interview, or you call switch interviews also. Can you explain a little bit more how one should do that? How do we conduct this interview?
Yep. So everyone listening, we are writing a book on that right now. Oh, awesome. And it'll be out in 4, 5, 6 months, early next year. Okay. And it's actually going to be pretty, rigorous and going through all of explaining the methodology, explaining the method, explaining the terms. It's going to be a really good book. It's probably closer to social science as far as the kind of real rigor and the depth we go into actually doing everything than it is to a very superficial like, hey, here is the 6 bullet points to hit. Good luck, right? Okay, so a switch interview is the high-level process is we want to look for people who have recently purchased a product or recently stopped using a product. And again, that's kind of why we call them switching, because we're trying to dig into revealed preference, right, as opposed to stated preference and habits, right? So we're trying to study changes in people's behavior because actions speak louder than words, right? They might say, hey, your product was great, but then you ask them, yeah, but you canceled it. Well, right? So we're looking for that changes in their behavior. And so that's a good place to start. So look for people who have just starting using a product or just stopped using it. Okay. If you have your own product, then it's good to start, just because it's easier to get access to these people. It's good to start by talking to people who have just started using your product or people who have just stopped using your product. So think 1 to 3 months, right, in both directions. If you don't have a product yet, you can do the same thing, but around products or services who you think will be your competitors in the future. Right. So even if you don't have a product, you can still do these interviews. Anyway, so you do that, then we do about 10 to 15 of people who have just started, people who just stopped, and then we're trying to look for all those jobs data. So things were fine a month ago, and then, tell me the story about when you started realizing you needed to make a change. How did you think about that change? What options did you look out? Did you try? Did you compensate in some ways? Did you talk to your friends about what they did when you were looking on Amazon or on Google? What were you searching for? Right. What kind of things were standing out to you? What seemed like great? All that kind of stuff as we study their journey from, okay, everything was fine, but then all of a sudden you determined you wanted to change.
Right.
You learned some stuff, and then you decide to make a decision on making the change.
Makes sense. How is it different from, let's say, a customer development interview, or is it some sort of mixture?
Yeah. So as I understand, it's been a while since I've revisited Steve Blank's stuff. So
Okay.
the way that I recall customer development process is, oh man, I can't remember right now. Maybe I'll bring it up here.
Sure.
As we're talking, and maybe we'll
Okay. Let's say
customer development, but I kind of say in general is that what's different is that in general is that a switch interview, which is different than say contextual inquiry or other types of more broad ethnographic stuff.
Right.
Is this dimension of time, right? So like that's what it is. Like it's not going out and talking to people about, okay, what are you doing today, right? And what do you do and don't like about today? That's just like study. That's like a snapshot. It's like, okay, how are things today? Whereas a switch interview has this dimension of time of, okay, well, let's actually go back to 6 months ago and tell me how you got to today. So it's that dimension of time, which is different. Because again, jobs to be done is about progress, and progress is maybe, if you want to give some kind of formula to it, it might be like satisfaction over time, or right. It's just like it's about change. It's about your velocity. It's that's what it's about. It's this dimension of time, and so we're trying to study that, as opposed to a very static, quote needs unquote model, which is okay. What do you do and don't need today? That's just kind of like a snapshot of things today versus, again, a progress model, which is interested in studying how these needs come and go and adapt and change over time.
Interesting. So let's say we are making a product and we found out with these switch interviews that there are multiple job stories that people are hiring our product for different jobs. So how do you prioritize and how do you make sense of that? Okay, which should one be focusing on in terms of further product development and marketing as well?
Yep. So for a new, so I'll describe what I'm doing right now.
Sure.
So again, I'll speak I always prefer to speak, this is what I'm doing as opposed to speaking hypothetically. You should do this, but not me. Ha ha ha. Anyway, so what I'm doing right now is, as I am talking with customers and I'm building a new product, so I'm doing some other methods that I've created called experience acceptance testing, and another method I've invented called simulated shopping.
These methods would be in your next book, is it?
Not the next one.
Okay.
Because it's got to be the next book. Because, the next one's more about switch interviews and kind of studying jobs of today, as opposed to studying markets today and maybe building something around how markets are today, as opposed to developing with the aim of maybe changing markets. Right. So it's a little different thing.
Okay. Please go ahead.
So again, going back to how do I figure out how to prioritize and what?
Right.
So first off, some easy things to do. So actually, I would even back up, right? So I guess we'll have to back up. What? And this is something that, and I know this because I've been there as a product manager. We have to take a step back. Again, as product managers, we get so focused on, maybe like improving the product. We have to improve the product. We got to make it better. And we just kind of obsess about that. But we really got to also put our business hat on and recognize that, well, wait a minute, actually, what us as product managers or product designers, what the business is really hiring us to do or paying us to do is to figure out how to grow the product. So that's actually where we need to start. So I would say make the decision of, do we want to make a change that acquires more customers, or do we want to make a change that will prevent people from leaving?
Okay.
Because if you want to create growth, right, which is every business wants to create growth, increase revenue or gain more customers, usually gain more customers through increasing revenue, or increasing revenue through gaining more customers usually. Right. So we have to ask, okay, do we want to make a change to our product that gets more people to start using it or prevents people from switching away from it. So that's where you start. And then, so that's like your first kind of helps you prioritize what to do. And then you get into, okay, well, let's start interviewing people. So let's say that, look, churn is low, so we need to figure out how to get more people to buy our product. Okay, great. So then I would just do switch interviews around, okay, why are people buying our product? And then again, going back to that jobs data, let's identify one, like some constraints, like what are the top constraints? Like, oh, I wanted to buy your product, but
XYZ.
It didn't have right. I mean, it didn't have, or I mean, I almost didn't buy it because of, it was missing Salesforce integration. Whatever. Like it was missing something, and therefore, I looked at it and it looked really hard to use, and so I didn't buy it. But then someone convinced me it really was easy. So okay, great. So there's some perception that's hard to use. Like and then you can quantify that. Like the qualitative part is kind of identifying what those things are. Are people having a functional constraint or whatever, and then we can maybe quantify that with, as we do like onboard interviews, or onboard surveys. Hey, can you answer this quick 5 questions of why you're signing up? Was it easy? Whatever. You try to quantify that. So I think that's a good way, like techniques like that. Also things like identifying, do we have the right marketing message? We found out that people were Googling for best CRM, right? But but those were not our keywords. Our keywords are, favorite CRM or something around Google Ads. So, it's like you just kind of like figure that out do your best to figure out what changes to marketing and or the product would help us acquire more customers. And then the same thing for people who may be leaving the product. Why are they leaving the product? And then can we quantify that? And then I would just use that as your way of prioritizing changes to the product.
Makes sense. Any other key advice would you like to give to people who trying to apply jobs to be done?
Yeah, so I would say that again. So I would say, and again, here's another thing too, which I maybe used this before. Okay. And this is something that, again, like Bob and Clay and a lot of the other people out there who talk about jobs, they refer to it as a framework. And again, a lot of times when people hear framework, they think of it as a method. Like a framework is giving me structure as to what I should.
Some actionable steps or something like that.
Yeah, right. But it's really, and that's why I don't use the word framework, even though it's still legitimately correct, but it's really framework of ideas, of concepts. Like you can refer to a theory as a framework, as like the theory of relativity, for example, is actually a framework of ideas that Einstein has. But so I would say that jobs to be done isn't really something that you do. It's a belief how markets operate, of what causes consumers to buy and use products. Right. So I would say that my best advice is to recognize that it's a theory of and again, when I say theory, it's a hypothesis that explains why consumers buy products and what causes them to engage in markets. Right. And so that's it. And so it's most helpful at that level, right? At the helping you understand and define a market and developing your product strategy and helping you understand what change your product should deliver. But it's not best for helping you improve or necessarily design that product itself. There's tons of stuff out there on UX research, on usability research, on design thinking, Google design sprints. I mean, all that kind of stuff. That's great to help you go through the process of designing. But I would say that, and this will actually be in the book too, I think, so like for example, in a Google design sprint, I think that week should start off with, okay, what are the job to be done? Like, what's the change that someone is seeking with our product? Great, let's brainstorm on this and go through the Google design sprint. And at the end of it, let's test if our product concept, can deliver on that change. So it's kind of like it bookends. So that's how I would, the 2 things that I would recommend to people is, 1, recognize that it's not a method. It's a thinking, 1. And then 2, it's a great informant and guidelines for your chosen design methods.
Awesome. What books, people, or blog, newsletter would you suggest people to follow?
So of course, I'll suggest my book, right? When Coffee and Kale Compete. Although there have been, that's a good introduction. Although there have been advances in the theory, which is another reason why doing an update in 6 months is going to be what we've learned over the last 3 or 4 years of applying jobs theory. Okay. Clay's book, Competing Against Luck, there's some things that disagree in there.
Okay.
But his is a very nice, gentle introduction. Like sometimes having a gentle introduction means simplifying things so much where it's like technically wrong, but the goal is to get you to understand. So like that's a good thing to help you understand, right? But then as you go deeper, you're going to have to, you'll need more granular understanding of things.
Right. Where people can find you?
Yep. So just Twitter, my Twitter handle, which is at Alan Klement. I also manage the collection at jtbd.info, where other people write about their experience with jobs.
Okay.
I think that's just the best.
Awesome.
And if you want to contact me, you can hit me over Twitter or go to my name, alanklement.com. That's Klement with a K. Where you can just send me an email directly if you want to talk or have questions about jobs.
Awesome, Alan. It was great talking to you. Thanks a lot again.
Yes, likewise. Take care. See you.
See ya. That's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes would be available in the link below, or you can just go to insightsalley.com/notes. Please rate, review, subscribe in whichever app you are listening to this episode. And most importantly, give feedback in comments, reviews, or you can just email me at arun@insightsalley.com. You can also follow and connect with me on Instagram, Twitter, etc. My handle everywhere is ARUN11192. And remember, always be learning. Bye.